where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello, everyone. I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. Dear listeners, there's a story for you today because that is life. A story. Once upon a time, a girl was born in Paris to a Portuguese actor and a French teacher who raised her in Portugal and France. Then she started traveling by herself at the age of 16 in the US and throughout Brazil the following year. She never stopped exploring the world ever since. She embarked on an international advertising career and for 20 years worked with multinational blue chip clients across 4 continents and 8 countries, while also becoming fluent in 4 languages. She is now the CEO and co founder of Leadership CQ. I will let her explain the CQ. And she's also a specialist in intercultural conflict management with clients across the globe. She, in my opinion, leads a truly international or intercultural life between Lisbon, Brussels, and Paris with 3 sons who have 3 nationalities. Requires an explanation there. And she's the author of a book with a very interesting title, published a few years ago. And what is the title of a book? Don't Mess with My Professionality. Dear listeners, the protagonist of the story, Vanessa Barros, is with us today. And given the story I just told you, she makes a perfect guest between the East and the West. A very warm welcome, Vanessa. Thank you for joining us. And before I launch further and I ask you to fill in the dots in the little story that I just told the audience, can you explain the title of the book? I opened it because the title itself was catchy. What am I going to find now?
It came from an epiphany. After 15 years running global brands around the world, I came back to France for an assignment in my home country. And I was working on a very French account, Peugeot, the cars, and a very French agency called BETC from the Havas Group. And I had been groomed and had grew up professionally working the American / English way with values of professionalism that were very particular, that I convinced myself were the only ones. And when I came back to France, I had a countercultural shock like there's no tomorrow. And I was miserable for a few weeks and months until it came to me that those I thought were completely unprofessional, loser. I don't know. I was like so angry at the way the differences were happening. You know, the meetings would not start on time. In my world, they had to start on time. The French would have this extraordinary way of finishing a very long meeting and saying, oh, we made great progress, but there were no next steps or things that to me were absolutely fundamental. And just it occurred to me suddenly by looking at the incredible success of that client and of that agency that there wasn't such thing as a standard for professionalism. There was the professionalism in France, the professionalism in the US, in India, in China, and whatever. And probably even more, the professionalism of Vanessa versus Minu versus whoever. And that because it was not a standard, we needed to negotiate what it meant for any of us. And today, when I meet professionals, we do conferences at the EU, we're doing multinationals. And I always start by asking people, use 3 words to tell me what professionalism is. And hundreds of words appear on screen because everybody has a different way of looking at it. And that makes them realize that we're all very, very different, even when we come from the same place, in the way we perceive the workplace. So that's why the book became Don't Mess with My Professionalism, which was a bit of an irony of actually we need to mess with each other's professionalism because they're going to clash. And we're going to have to find out how they are and what they do. We need to protect values that are absolutely key to us. And there's others that we can negotiate. And that's what makes the beauty of intercultural team management and leadership.
That's interesting because, these are words I never gave thought to many years back. I just lived that life with international, intercultural clients. One just flows. Now, in the last couple of years, I'm questioning. So, as you rightly put it, I think you had a very nice statement where you said the professionalism could be yours, mine, or, anybody else's. Everybody would. So there is no standard per se, or is there one? Because in my head, for example, a very small example, a standard would be like, you've sent me a mail. I have a client. Let's say you are my client. You've sent me a mail and I reply within the next 24 or 48 hours. And number two standard would be, if I've committed to a deadline, I deliver on that deadline. And if not, for it can only be an emergency, then I inform before. So you have really worked in the trenches across the world. In these two examples, what would you say?
The answering an email within 48 hours is something I was taught when I moved to the United States. So it was not something that came from my upbringing, my cultural upbringing. Yes, there is an international Western standard of doing business. And across the now 300 executives that I interviewed around the globe, across more than 66 nationalities and 20 industries, some would argue that there's no cultural differences, but because professionalism is a standard, because it's about respecting each other. But what does it mean across cultures? It's about being polite. Again, what does it mean about culture? It's about being integral. What does it mean about? And they use those terms that they believe, some believe, are set in stone, not realizing the nuances and the subjectivity behind all of them. So even that notion of getting back to somebody quite quickly is something that I think is deeply rooted in cultural organizations and parts of the world. The being on time is a very interesting one because when I cover the differences of time management across the world and how time can be linear in some countries and time is circular in others, and how that creates a tension because somebody who's very linear and wants things to happen one after the other very precisely, like a sophisticated stereotype would be Japan, right? If you're not 10 minutes early for a meeting, you're already late. Well, if you try to tell a Japanese that time is not of the essence, that is relative, that yes, you agreed to delivering it that day, but you know what, a day or two more, does that really change the face of the world? He or she's going to lose it. They're going to lose it. And whereas there's some cultures where it's also the destiny, it's also how things are done, and there are reasons for. So even in such matters, we need to not take for granted that another person is going to absolutely believe the same way we believe in things. And so what I would argue is, if we believe that that deadline is crucial for the organization and would have tremendous detrimental effects, we better be on top of it and anticipate tremendously, particularly if we're dealing with a country. Imagine it's our supplier or some partners that are working with us that come from countries where time is more polychronic and not monochronic.
So, how did you land up in different continents and different places? Was it design or destiny?
So it was definitely influenced by my family. I was raised in both countries, so the multinational culture of my own family nucleus was there. My mom was in peace organizations going through Africa, Middle East. And when I became a teenager, my aunt was in foreign affairs, and so in France. And so that opened the world of possibilities. My aunt and uncle invited me to a long trip to the United States. I had an American friend there, so at the age of 16, 17, I did the East Coast by car with an 18-year-old girlfriend. And it was crazy because I was very fortunate that my parents trusted me for those crazy adventures. And then the following year, I was, offered by the family a 2-month trip to Brazil. So that opened a door of possibilities that never ended, really. So, yeah, so I would say a destiny heavily influenced by my family.
This traveling bug was in you
Definitely.
and is still there.
Oh, yeah. And because I am in CSR, There's always that climate and that issue over pollution and stuff. So I am the black sheep with some of my colleagues because I keep on traveling and it's also my specialty, right? To talk and to teach about cultural differences if you haven't seen the world is a bit weird. So I teach in Dubai, I teach in Ghaziabad, I teach in Morocco, I teach in Paris. My family is split amongst different places. My three sons are in each a different country.
Destiny seems to have played a significant part in Vanessa's life. In fact, many people from the western part of the globe with whom I spoke also agree on destiny's role in their lives. Many years ago, that word was used generally by people from the East. My two bites on the subject? Our ways of being, predilections, to whom and where we are born are already decided. Yet, we have free will. Let's see where Vanessa's free will took her. That's interesting. Then it comes, I have two questions. But why did you move off from the world of advertising? That was your first choice. And then you worked in that for many years across countries. And then you shifted. It's a bit of a career shift to the intercultural field.
I think that career transitions are a combination of factors. Every 3 years in advertising, since almost the beginning of it, because I remember being in New York, so I would have had 6 years experience then, or even less. And I was already challenging myself and finding that the career was not stimulating intellectually enough. So there was a desire in me to learn and to get into knowledge rather than simply advertising. And advertising, and it's not to limit the industry, it's a fascinating industry that taught me so much. It's one where whether you have a small brand at the very beginning and you're an account manager, or when you then have a big account and you become a big shot, it's still the same process. Is you've got a client, you've got a brief, you need to promote a certain brand, and there's ways of going at it. And so it became sort of repetitive for me, even if I was changing categories, geographies, etc. And actually, it's through the changes of geographies, and I could realize that the moments where I was really, really excited and passionate about what I was doing is when I needed to understand the consumer. And so that sociological, psychological aspect of it was what was really getting me the excitement. And the last brand I was working on was Pond, which was an extraordinary learning curve because the theme of the campaign historically had been love. And so I had to research across the world the notion of femininity, the notion of beauty, but also the notion of love. And I remember this aha moment with the Indian continent where suddenly we were like, but hang on a second. Love is not always before marriage, or falling in love might not be before marriage. It could also be after marriage. And suddenly it was like, it depends. And even such things that were for me so rooted in my deep beliefs, it would open new worlds. And so I was based in Singapore then. A friend of mine, and this is a part of serendipity, who was working at IATA, the Association of Aviation and Transportation. So they have as many nationalities as they are airline companies. So roughly the number of countries in the world, around 190 plus, right? And he came for cross-cultural training. And he left me the books. I read the books. I contacted the authors, and they became my thesis supervisors. And it was really that passion of having done 20 years running global brands, meeting all these nationalities, experiencing all these challenges and also exciting moments, but also challenges. And to think, can't we do something better about it? Can't we understand it deeper? And when I was telling you about my countercultural shock coming back to France, at that point, I started doing training myself, and I had created training, with some of the biggies of this world, the Ofsteds and the Trumpenars. I had read a little bit. And so I was creating already a training program within the advertising. And then the opportunity of digging and doing a PhD in there was extraordinary. And in order to understand cultural intelligence, and you were saying earlier, you'll explain what CQ means. Well, CQ is cultural quotient, We had IQ, intellectual quotient, we have emotional quotient, EQ, and then there's CQ, cultural quotient. So that ability to manage across cultures and detect the differences and manage them accordingly. And she knew that in order to be culturally intelligent, you need to work a lot on yourself, on your perceptions, on your awareness. And so she pushed me in directions related to mindfulness, related to traveling. She pushed my boundaries and limits to really look at my network and interview 200 people for my PhD. It was like humongous because these were senior executives. So that was like a massive, massive. And I'm so glad she did all that because it really pushed everything in me. And I came out really, really strengthened. And I remember this very good friend who's very, very aware of the things of the world, very well traveled. And before I did my PhD, she said, Vanessa, you've traveled to so many countries, you've worked everywhere. What are you going to learn in a PhD about this topic? You know it all. And boy, did I learn so much, so much. I'm so glad I did this. And I'm so humble now about the topic because the more I move forward, the more I know I need to learn, and the more I know it's fascinating. So yeah, so there was a shift between a world of advertising and then a world of knowledge, really. And now I'm really in the world of knowledge and research and ideas. So it's still a world of creativity and innovation, but in a different manner.
So essentially, you moved on. Your cup of tea can change as we ourselves evolve in the world. So what may be your cup of tea today may not be your cup of tea 5 years later because you've also grown. You read the book Men Are From Mars and Women from Venus.
I did not read it. I heard a lot about it, and a lot of people told me the content of it. But go ahead.
So I'll throw an interesting idea at you because the main tenets of the book are essentially that men and women come from different ways of being. So, different ways of thinking, emoting, expressing, and so on. Now, in many ways, I feel that the aspect of diversity and inclusion also begs to be taken up there because when we are talking of both in the personal sphere and the professional sphere, in the professional sphere, we are talking of even leadership styles. For example, a female would handle many things differently than a male per se because she's built differently. Would you agree that? That's a professional sphere I'm talking of. In the personal sphere as well, there is diversity. When the fact that there is gender diversity, let's say take a household, the man and a woman. There is diversity already in the house because it's gender diversity, the man and a woman. They are going to think differently, they are going to feel differently, they're going to express differently, and they're going to cross and have conflicts. Some interest will be there, some similarities, some differences. Have I thrown a bone?
So I have zero certainties about any of these topics. I know that some people are non binary and disagree with the fact that we would use sexual attributes as a means to differentiate male and female. I am a binary person. I'm more on the side of binary. I believe that I am a constructivist in terms of philosophy. So I believe that the world is what we make of it symbolically and how we human beings portray it, and therefore it becomes. I do know that stereotypes have been built and are still very present across cultures. And I can see the differences. When I go back to Portugal, a 60 plus year old man talking to me is not going to look at me. They're going to potentially answer my father or my partner. They might not talk to me directly. It's that difficult at times. So, are they different styles? They are definitely individual different styles. I do not embrace the notion that to become a leader, a woman would have to embrace stereotypical views of a certain type of leadership that is aggressive, that is bossy, that is fightful, that is. I do not agree with the fact that a woman is more nurturing, etc. I know men who are extremely nurturing, and I know that we are limited as female in the business because sometimes we are given challenges that are the most difficult ones, that are the human ones, whereas men might be given more logistical challenges. I'm talking CEO level here because of the stereotypes. A guy's going to be better at organization, a woman's going to be much better at relationships. But the relationship is the most difficult part. So if you give politics to a woman, the chances that, or to a man, the chances that they will not succeed is higher. And so that also creates unfair results at times on success ladder. So yeah, for me, it's very complex. I do believe in a very different sexuality between the two, and that I think has implications at times on reactions and how we do things, and maybe levels of energy. And when it comes to our preferences, I would say that I'm probably leaning towards the fact that it's our mothers and fathers who taught us to be the way we are, rather than us being born with a DNA that calls us to be certain things. So I think that's what happens.
Gender diversity, equality, and roles. It is a Pandora's box which existed in a closet till some years ago. In the very dynamic now that we live in, that box has opened and released a multitude of questions, with some clear answers and some not. I believe that different genders are not equal. They are unique, however, and therefore bring forth a varied set of capabilities and different ways of being, which may or may not equate to set definitions. Yet, the playing field, that is, equality in opportunities and rewards, should be a given, considering that we are interacting with human beings. An idea of gender equalities could be kept in the background while interacting with individuals. Intercultural awareness and strategy would then be very useful for a wholesome response. Therefore, building cultural intelligence in the present world that we live in is actually not only desirable, but required. When we say that D&I, diversity and inclusion, are hot topics in the world today, then in your language, what is diversity?
So diversity is all our individual differences as human beings. So you've got visible, invisible, and acquired differences. When we think about the visible, you could argue gender, you could argue ethnicity, you could argue, are we a bit more chubby, are we a bit taller, those are the visible differences. Some religions are more visible than others if we have attires that signify our religions. Then you've got the invisible ones. Religion could be one, or values, or a lot of neurodiversities are not visible, or chronic illnesses, or deep beliefs. And then the acquired: are we married? Do we have children? Are we rich or poor? Those things evolve throughout our lives or not, but it can be acquired. So that's the breadth. And when it comes to gender, it's about how we feel in our bodies. And some people were born with something that is not who they think they are, and they feel like sandpaper, and they feel that they're not the gender they were assigned to at birth. And others have love stories with individuals of the same gender. And I don't like when LGBT is associated with sexuality. And when I interview members of the LGBT group, I mean, they say, come on, I'm not making love to my partner 24 hours a day. I'm living with them. It's like, and I appreciate that. It's much more complex than that. That is that spectrum of tremendous diversity, as much as introversion, extroversion, shyness, not shyness, all those traits of character that makes us who we are. And so that's the diversity part. The inclusion is the ability to make all these differences come as they are and get to the top of their abilities and their potential. So some people have this analogy of inviting people for dinner, and that's diversity, very different people around the table. And inclusion is everybody has a saying, everybody can talk, everybody can freely say what they want and mean and believe. Inclusion in the workplace is that everybody comes in and does not feel alienated because of who they are, afraid of telling who they are, or incapable of doing their job because of who they are. If there's a ramp at the back of the building for somebody on a wheelchair to come in, that's not really inclusion. That's a discrimination already. They have to go around the building, let them come in, have the ergonomy of all the buildings be agreeable to everyone. I meet a lot of people who can't talk about their gender orientation because it's illegal in the countries they go through, and so they have what we call an emotional tax. They are double agents. They at home they can be somebody, and when they go to the office, they play a different character. That is very heavy cognitively, and we only have 100% that we can use. So if 20 of that is used in terms of I need to think about what I say, the pronouns I use when I talk about partners, I need to not let the information pass that it's a man if I'm a man, because that would be unacceptable, things like that. Well, that means you only have 80% left to function. So that's the world that I deal with, really. It's the extraordinary potential of that diversity, and how we make it blossom, and how we harmoniously make those very different people work together.
So, what we are saying, let me reiterate, diversity would be the set of differences in people in many different ways, and inclusion to allow them to air those differences and be themselves and give them a place at the table, right?
For the best of themselves, meaning for their fullest potential, because that's what happens usually is when there's discrimination, then they don't give their full potential. They are limited, or we don't take full advantage of what they can bring to the table through our fears, through organizations that are not set up for them. Yeah, so that's correct.
And but then, is it not difficult at times in that field, because diversity is everywhere, be it in the personal sphere, professional sphere, in governments and corporates, academia, everywhere? So sometimes, is it not difficult then at a particular table to arrive at a unanimous decision while allowing different voices?
Of course, diversity is complexity, and complexity is not easy. So, of course, the chances that a very homogeneous group come to a same conclusion that could, by the way, be completely wrong, and that's what we call the phenomena of groupthink, when very smart people convince themselves homogeneously, and they all absolutely convinced there's the right way to go, and it's the complete opposite. And that was proven politically in the history of humanity, and with the Cuban crisis with the US and the decisions that we're taking with the pig bay. And it was really wrong, the decision. And in retrospect, in hindsight, everybody would have said it was completely ridiculous and wrong. So yes, diversity is complex, and that's why it's so important to have the the cultural intelligence come in, because you need that soft skill to make it work. Because otherwise, it can be a disaster. Become a Babel tower where everybody talks a different language, nobody understands each other, and it all goes pear shaped. So there's a big responsibility from leadership to increase diversity, because it's the only way for survival. And AI is a particular example where if it's not diverse from the start, it's a disaster. In the UK, Black people would not be recognized as photographs for their passports because the AI was not ready for recognition of Black color. And not so long ago, the Google app that recognizes images and tells you what it is would associate, which is horrendous, Black people to gorillas, because again, I mean, if Black people were part of the programming system and the feeding of the information, that would not happen. And so we need diversity to survive, and we have to deal with diversity because of the migrations and because of the world and how it's going right now in terms of the social movements and population movements that are happening. So diversity is here. What we need to do is to embrace it, to look at it as a richness, and to deal with it. And dealing with it is managing it, is not tolerating it, it's accepting it and managing it. So it's a lot of hard work.
And on your website, I read something, an interesting statement, which is neuroscience research shows that we are wired to dislike differences and to put people in different boxes and stick to old habits. Is that true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We are wired for survival to be binary, right, wrong, dangerous, not dangerous. Let's think about ourselves hundreds of thousands of or tens of thousands of years ago. We needed to recognize whether the tiger with their stripes was going to eat us or we were going to eat them. And today we're still wired exactly the same way. So, when we learn about trees, you didn't learn that there was a pine tree, an oak tree. No, you learned that there was a trunk, roots, branches, and leaves. That's what a tree is, and that's a shortcut for understanding what something is, which is a schema. And that's what leads us to stereotype everything, because the way we learn things is we go to the quickest way of memorizing it by making associations. So yes, we prefer what looks like us than other. And of course, anybody would say, no, but I love people who are very different from me. Of course, I'm not denying that some of us are very open to diversity. But in times of big, big crisis, and unconsciously, probably we go back to that, prefer someone who's like me than anybody else. So, and that reality is not something, yeah. And by no means do I want people to feel bad about this. It's who we are, and we should love ourselves for who we are. And so I like this saying that says it's not the first thought that is the problem, it's the second and what you do about it. If your first instinct is to dislike the difference, the second thought should be about, oh, but I know that instinctively that's what I do. So then you reprocess that first reaction, and then what do you do about it? And so that's the whole process of inclusive leadership, is to tame our demons in a way, and to tame the brain, one of the brains that we have. We have this narrative brain, that the one that I was telling you about, the shortcuts, the immediate, the I react. And then there's this other brain that is only experiential, that only lives the world through the senses, without interpreting, without judging the senses. It's cold, it's hot, there's wind, I'm seeing something. That's fundamental. And that other brain, the experience brain, is the one that enables us to discover the world of diversity without judgment. It's that one that is going to enable us to not interpret when we see a situation that is unusual to us, that is going to protect us from calling somebody unprofessional because they're not doing the things the way we want to do in them.
Essentially, we're talking of awareness, the mindfulness when you are just being aware of whatever is going on without actually making a judgment or getting attached to a particular thought or a feeling or whatever comes up. So we're talking of awareness, right?
Correct. And be able to have the awareness that we learn through internal statistics. The norm in our lives is the majority of instances that happen in a certain way. And so the next time we see a scene, we go back to that statistical curve, and we are like, okay, then, it's that example of this journalist from the BBC who suddenly goes live, and these kids run into his office, and there's an Asian woman that comes and picks them up. Everybody on earth, including me, by the way, I was living in Singapore at the time, thought that the lady was the childcare. Nobody thought that it was the wife. Why? Because the norm for an expat in Southeast Asia is that when there's an Asian lady with children, chances are that she's the carer of the children. And so immediately that's the association we make. As if suddenly there was something that looked like a tree with trunks, leaves, branches, and it wasn't a tree. It would take us a long time to agree that it wasn't a tree, because in our norm, in our logic, it is one. And so that's where all the aggressions, the microaggressions come from, is because we make those quick associations, and we misinterpret people's behavior.
You specialize in intercultural conflict management. Is there a so called pattern there as well when we say in the East and the West? Are the triggers similar or are they different? What would be your take on this?
So I would add to the East and West, the South, and that would gives us three big cultures in the world: faith, dignity, and honor. Faith being what you call the East, dignity would be what we call the West, And honor would be Central South America, Africa, Middle East. I would argue that India is between face and honor. And the big difference there is all related to how we see ourselves as an entity. In the dignity culture, it's me, myself, and nobody can take my worth away from myself. Nobody. My worth is there from the moment I was born. I'm worth it. And nobody can take that value away from me. In a face environment, the collective can take it away from me, and so can you. If you get angry, if you lose composure, you lose face. If somebody aggresses you, they lose face. The collective is part of who you are, and therefore the collective can take away the worth that you've got. And then in the honor part, the worst can also be taken out from others, but in a different way. Here, you lose your value when you are misled by the other. When you are aggressed by the other, is because you've been stupid enough to let yourself be misled. And so, in the honor culture, you're going to have to show who you are. It would be the caricature a bit of the mafia kind of you, where you're showing the toughness of yourself. You show your pectorals and you're like, oh, because you don't want others to aggress you or to think that you might be vulnerable. Because of those three ways of looking at who we are, conflict is completely dealt with differently. In an environment of dignity, it's two beings that are very sure of their own value that engage with each other in a sort of negotiation. In the face environment, it's a collective that is dealing with a harmony. And in the honor, it's a bit more of a clash of power games of who's going to shout louder than the other one in a way. So there's going to be more avoidance on the face side. There's going to be more confrontation on the honor side and a sort of more rational negotiation on the dignity side. That would be a very broad picture of what conflict could look like across the world.
Very interesting. So there's a map right now, mental map that you've just drawn for us. But are we saying, again, this is like trying to put things in a stereotypical way, is it not? It could be generally like this, but it may not be like this.
The reason why this new map of the world and trying to look at those three different big differences was because researchers felt that by limiting to East and West, they were missing out on a big chunk of the population that was not behaving the same way. And you did not have in South America or in Africa the face culture and the avoidance nature of things that you have. And so it's Kellogg's and Brett who came up with this from Kellogg's University, and she was working on intercultural negotiations, and she brought that additional element of hang on a second, we're always forgetting the South, and to me it was an epiphany. Another one after the fact that professionalism was not a standard, the fact that you had, because it made me so understand South Europe compared to Northern Europe, for instance, because South Europe is a lot more into honor than dignity, and for myself to understand Portugal versus France, it was like fascinating. So and yes, it's stereotypical, but it's a sophistication stereotypical thing, meaning that it's backed up by research and by quantified stats to show those differences. Now, as with professionalism, we all have five ways of handling conflict. And some of us prefer to win always and to be dominant. Some of us prefer to yield because the last thing we want is conflict with somebody else. Some others we prefer to avoid completely. Some of us are always compromising. And finally, some of us are tearing our hair out to get to the win-win situation. And all I can say is play those five styles because they are useful in different moments, particularly across cultures. And don't always play on the one that comes to you instinctively as the one you prefer. Just play with that palette, that range of strategies.
So, in conflict situations, in your experience, the triggers in different cultures would also, or in countries would also, countries, cultures, people, triggers would also be different. And how to handle them would also be different, right?
Absolutely. The only two triggers that generate anger in us, and that's universal, is if you feel a threat towards your identity or if you feel a threat towards an objective. So imagine that you would like to be called Mrs. Gupta and that I come to you and I'm like, hello, Minu, and I am much more democratic than you might be. You might feel aggressed because you might feel that you're being disrespected in some way by not being treated with the respect that you believe in. There was a silly example of it, but it's one. Okay. So that could be an example of how I could threaten your identity. If I said something you really disagree with and I said it very strongly and I confronted you on it, or if I aggressed you with my words, anyway, all of that is a threat to your identity. The other time that you could really get aggravated is if I, in my with my behavior, become a threat to something you're trying to achieve. Imagine that we agreed to do this podcast, and that's one objective. And for some reason, I turn up super late. I don't do the things technically the way you asked me to. I misbehave or whatever. Then it's going to be a threat to something you wanted to do. You're going to feel frustrated that the podcast is not happening the way you wanted it to happen, or, you know. And so those are the only two instances in life that we human beings get aggravated. And the way to threat identity or threaten an objective varies across cultures, of course, because if you are super sharp on time and love to be on a timely manner, and I turn up late, it could be a threat to something you wanted to achieve because we can't fill in the agenda anymore of the meeting because we don't have time enough. You could also feel disrespected, by the way. Sometimes those threats go in pairs. I'm late, you had to wait for a long time, you feel like, hey, come on, she's treating me in a disrespectful manner. So that could also be that threat. So across cultures, the differences in behaviors keep on threatening the other one because the beliefs are different. And so we need to realize when somebody is hitting our hot buttons of things that we like and dislike, and realize whether they're doing it intentionally or whether there's a cultural reason why they're doing it. And then we need to manage the situation. The French love to interrupt. If you interrupt a German or a Japanese or a Dutch, you are the rudest person in the world. And one of the reasons as well is that in those languages, the verb comes at the very end. So unless I let my German counterpart tell me what he's doing about the swimming pool and let him finish his sentence, I don't know whether he's going to swim in the swimming pool, he's going to wash the swimming pool, he's going to buy the swimming pool, he's going to sell the swimming pool. I need to wait for the end of the sentence. So if I interrupt them, I don't know what they're about to say. So I don't care about what they're about to say in their minds. This would be very subconsciously, right? But so those can be explained, those little nuances and why certain behaviors from some cultures are so difficult and aggressive and threatening to other cultures.
Very interesting. The point that you just raised, 2 points, I can tell you. The last one I will mention to my husband, who's Dutch. So, so he always on the border. You just interrupted me once again. So that's his grouse. So now I can tell him, okay, that is me. So coming to mergers and acquisitions, in your experience, I've had my own set of experiences in mergers and acquisitions, and I have an opinion on that, whether it be in the same country or it's in different continents. What is your opinion when where conflict situations or they happen, they don't happen? Give me some bites on that.
So the first bite is that culture is completely underrepresented when it comes to the negotiations and the assessment of the future success of a merger and acquisition. Usually and historically, it was always about numbers, it was about logistical misfit or match, complementarity, and people would completely undermine the importance of culture. 70% of the merger and acquisitions that go pear shaped do it because of cultural misfit. So culture is like super critical to be analyzed carefully before the decision of merger and acquisition, and very much during the honeymoon and the rest of it. The second thing that commonly happened to me until recent times, most of the merger and acquisitions that I've experienced, symbolically, it was either one company taking over another or creating a sort of monster with two heads, with the beginning of the word and the end of the word being a 50-50 of what it used to be. You know, like it was a Reckitt and Coleman, Benckiser, it becomes Reckitt Benckiser. Or simply one disappears, like when Kraft acquired Cadbury, it was Kraft and there was no more Cadbury. What happened when Stellantis, which was the fusion of the merger of Ford, Fiat, and Peugeot PSA, I thought it was really interesting that they came up with a greater name, Stellantis. And that to me was really the symbolization of that third culture that we're trying to create, because two organizations or more are two cultures or more. And it's not overnight that you settle those differences. And so to have the intelligence to put everybody at ease with their historical background and telling them now we're going to embrace this new entity, this third culture that we're all going to fabricate together for the best of harmonies, is what I think is the great thing to do. So bring a lot more soft skills to the table when it comes to M&As, rather than always look at it from the financial and strategic standpoint, and then prepare the honeymoon. And KLM Air France was a nightmare for 5 6 years because they didn't deal with it. And you're looking at two European countries. You could argue, come on, this is all dignity, it should be fine. No, it's not. The French and the Dutch are very different. And the organizations did not do things properly to help the employees embrace their differences and realize that a Dutch that tells you in your face what he thinks is not rude, is just being Dutch, and that French, who's a bit more social, relational, political, is just being French. And if people had understood each other's stereotypes, but also gone beyond those and found ways of working the balance and the harmony within the organizations, would have come a lot earlier.
And so, what was the final result of this merger finally?
KLM and Air France still is ongoing. I believe that now things are a bit more settled and that the French have understood the Dutch and vice versa. But for 5 years, it was very painful within the organization.
As I remember, I will not mention the respective companies, there was one company which was number one in the world overtaking another one, which was number four or five in the world. So they called it a merger, but actually it was overtaking. And what finally would happened, the second one, let's call it B for the sake, which is number four and number five in the world, a lot of people, there was attrition in people. So they started leaving. There was no communication flow. What I have understood in these processes, the most important thing, or the lack of which, is worse. There's one at the stakeholder level where you should come back with a third entity and say, this is a happy mix, this is where we want to go. But there's another very important thing which happens. There is complete lack of communication down the line. People have no idea, the employees, particularly the overtaken on both sides, what is going to happen next. And therefore, there is sudden attrition. People are insecure. Okay, they are going to remove us. Let's start looking for jobs. It was very interesting. I watched that process for 2 3 years. It was very interesting. And what happened was very clear. The second one actually lost its complete brand name. And it was a generations old company, and people left. They had most of the things I heard every day was, we have no idea what's happening. One line they always said, I'm very sure we'll be kicked out.
Another phenomenon, to build on what you're just saying, is that usually through the process of the merger and acquisition, so the before the M&A, there is that entire uncertainty of whether it's finally going to happen. And because part of why it should happen is the numbers of both entities, there's a tremendous moment of conservatism where there's no more hire, there's no more expenditure, that is already hard to live with people. And there's a tremendous uncertainty indeed of what's going to happen if the M&A finally happens. So even at the very top where people are informed, it's very unsettling. So you have shaken the spirits of people who were not sure whether it was finally going to happen or not. And then you add to the injury the fact that you don't communicate or give them an instructions guide on how to get married, basically. It's a disaster. In many, many cases, it's a disaster. I'm with you on that.
You used the word get married just now, and I actually agree with that. What I have come to the conclusion with is the following: getting married is pretty much, when we're talking of two individuals, male, female, or same gender, or between companies, or between a job and a person. It is an equation and a relationship where everything comes in: diversity, inclusion, culture, it all comes into the picture. So it is actually a case of getting married. The mergers and acquisitions between individuals and a job in a company. You don't marry a company unless your values similar. You said that somewhere, right in the somewhere you mentioned about the last roles that you had, and
They have a misfit of cultures with a company that I've joined, indeed.
at all levels. And I finally come to the conclusion, personal and professional. Where is the cut? I grew up putting profession at one level and personal at one level. Suddenly, in the last couple of years, I've come to the conclusion no, it's the same person who is interacting at all levels. So it has to be the same. You cannot, and ideally should not be smiley, happy face, and go to the office and come back and take off your smile like a coat and hang it on the wall and suddenly become grumpy. So it is the same person. There has to be one set of values which flow forth in that direction as well in this direction. What is your take on that?
I abundantly believe that indeed, the closer you are to the values of the company you're joining, to the industry you're joining, I always encourage the people, the youngster around me, to just embrace their passions, because that's where we're best, is when we love what we do. And I always say to everybody else, the day you know you found the right occupation is when you don't think of retirement anymore. It wouldn't even occur to an actor to think of retirement. They want to die on stage. That's the way it is. And that's because they've got that passion in them. I believe in that.
Where do you feel you belong? You live out of three places. Do you feel at all that you belong somewhere, or you're a universal soul who can just go anywhere and be there?
That's a question that was very difficult for me to answer for a while. And then there was a great exhibition recently in Portugal, and my partner gave me the book of the exhibition. And the exhibition was called Home, and it was people taking pictures of what they called home. And I really asked myself, what would I call home? I realized that what I call home is wherever I am. There's places where I feel a bit cozier because I know the place a bit better. And those are unusual ones. It's New York, Paris, probably Lisbon. But where I really feel home is when I'm surrounded by those close to me. So I had the most, but really the happiest of times recently celebrating Mother's Day with two of my sons in New York. I felt like so home because I was with that nucleus and there was that magic. I totally feel home with my partner here in Lisbon right now. So it's yeah, it's with whom I am that makes me home, and I realize that now.
And what would be your parting message to the people listening in?
I became a lot happier in life by the time my degree of flexibility grew. Across cultures, we keep on changing rules all the time. And so if we are stuck to our own rules, it's hard. If we are flexible and we see every difference as an opportunity for discovery, then it becomes an extraordinary journey. I would make an analogy that is not very poetic, but when you go to the restaurant and you ask for a specific meal, a dish, and the waiter comes with a dish that is not the one you ordered, there's two ways of responding. And historically, I would have just yelled and said, "That's not what I wanted. I want this other thing." Recently, I look at the situation. If it happens to me, of course, it's not every day that it happens to me, but if it does, I look at it and I thought, you know what? I wouldn't have ordered this thing. I'm going to try it. And definitely more often than not, it's an amazing discovery. And maybe it's the one that I will order next time. So, yeah. So that's really, really a message that I want people to take in, is that whatever comes your way in life, try to look at it with curiosity and see where it can be positive in some way, even if it's very frightening at first.
So you are saying be open and curious.
Let yourself be surprised, and that's why I believe so much in people, because I have three values in life, and maybe that's how I can conclude: is curiosity as this way of opening up to the world, the generosity of looking at things without judgment, without and trying to make it work, and then joy. As soon as you put a spin of fun, of joy to things, even when things annoy you, like, but why on earth? You start playing Sherlock Holmes. I was like, why on earth can I be annoyed with this, and you start laughing and smiling at it, something else comes up. It's just, yeah, those three values have done a lot for me, and are enabling me to embrace life with all the challenges that come with it, and with a lot of enthusiasm and joy, and it's very rewarding. Curiosity is what made me meet you.
Thank you for joining and namaste. It has been actually a pleasure swapping experiences, as you rightly said, insights, understanding, and how one field flows into the other in many ways. Dear listeners, that is Vanessa Barros. Her parting message echoes my philosophy and that of some amazing souls I have been interacting with between the East and the West. And as Vanessa would put it, also the South. Whatever comes your way, try to look at it with curiosity and see where it can be positive. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye bye.